Hi everyone and welcome to the next part of Aron Nimzowitsch, my system. The customary quote: play the opening like a book, the middle game like a magician, and the end game like a machine. From the Austrian chess player of the Romantic school, Rudolf Spielmann, who was known for his daredevil play, which was full of sacrifices, brilliancies, and beautiful ideas. A brief review of the last part, where we discussed regarding king and pawn endings and the privileged passed pawns with illustrations given by Nimzowitsch. So now, moving further into the book, Nimzowitsch gives an example of hole stopping in the case of two united passed pawns. He writes, now for a practical example of hole stopping. The board shows a position which occurred in a club match in Stockholm in 1921. White played b6 check and thus allowed the black king to establish an absolute blockade at b7. Absolute because from the nature of things, the king can never be driven away. There followed king d6 and the king wandered to g7 and refreshed himself with the black h-pawn. But at that very moment, black played bishop h5. And there was nothing more for the king to eat on the king's side. Dolefully, His Majesty then wandered back to the other wing. But here too, there was nothing for him, since black's bishop, now freed from guarding the pawn, made the board unhealthy. A fitting punishment overtook white for breaking the rules by their advance. Correct was a6, bishop d3, bishop d4, bishop f1 and king b4 check. Plans to stop the hole at a5. King a8, king a5, bishop e2 and b6. Everything according to program. The a-pawn advanced first, since the hindrance which can now be put in white's way, blockade is here almost too strong a term, can be easily brushed aside. The king stops the hole caused by the advance. The b-pawn moves on in their turn and the two pals are again united. Thus, like two trusty comrades on a battlefield, they will advance together, step by step, and it will be but seldom, and then only if far advanced, that it may happen that one of them will push on alone, ruthlessly leaving their friend to be slaughtered. Such an exceptional case is shown in the position on board. This position is from a game played between Julius Perles versus Aron Nimzowitsch. Perles was an Austrian chess player around the turn of the 20th century, and this game took place in the Karlsbad tournament of 1911 in Karlsbad or Karlovy Vary, located in present-day Czech Republic. Nimzowitsch writes, black moves. The black g-pawn shamefully leaves their comrade, the h-pawn, in the lurch. The g-pawn gets uppish and forgets the ties of friendship. So g4, rook takes on h4, g3 and black wins. Moving on, Nimzowitsch discusses regarding the protected passed pawn and writes, The difference in value between a protected and an ordinary passed pawn is well shown in the following example. Consider the position on board. White opens fire on the enemy's pawn majority, a4. King e5 and a takes on b5. c4 would have been wrong because of b4. With a protected passed pawn, the two kings would then have had the scarcely pleasant job of walking up and down, keeping an eye on the pawns. Hardly an inspiring occupation for a king. So, a takes on b5, c takes on b5, c4, and b takes on c4 check. Forced, b4 would not help, for the white pawns would go on to queen. So b takes on c4 check, and now we have a position which is characteristic of the difference in value between the pawns. For as is clear, the white king can gobble up the black passed pawn without any trouble, whereas the immunity of the protected f pawn from any attack by the black king is brilliantly in evidence. True, we have in our day seen how a player of little experience, ignoring this immunity in the position on board, with a pleased grin on their face and flushed with the lust of battle, going after the white g-pawn. After king f4 and f6, they see their error and begin in all seriousness to chase the fleeting pawn. The last scene of the comedy runs then thus: king e5, f7, king e6, f8, queen, and black resigns. We may formulate the case thus: the strength of a protected passed pawn lies in their immunity from attack by the enemy king. Moving further, Nimzowitsch discusses regarding the more remote passed pawn with an illustration from a position on a diagram, and writes, in the position on board, the h pawn is the remoter passed pawn, that is more remote from the midpoint of the board. After the indirect exchange of the two passed pawns, h5 check, king h6, king f5, king takes on h5, and king takes on f6. The black king is out of play. The white king, on the contrary, is well, because centrally developed, and this is decisive. The remoter passed pawn is therefore a trump card with great power of causing a diversion, but like any other trump card must be hoarded, not played out too quickly, and this must be our rule. The exchange of pawns which drew off the enemy king was only the preliminary to the white king's journey which followed. This journey, however, should be fully prepared for before the pawn advance takes place. Compare the position on board. White in the c pawn has the remoter passed pawn. The pawn's immediate advance would, however, be a mistake, for after c5 check, king takes on c5 and king takes on e5. The white king's journey to g7 would be a mere waste of time, For his traveling companion, the h-pawn has been too dilatory or slow to act. The right move is h4. The traveling companion reports themselves, and this induces g6. For this obliging advance, we have to thank the zugzwang weapon, of which we should make diligent use, particularly in the case of the remoter passed pawn. There now follows c5 check, king takes on c5, king takes on e5, king b4, and black arrives one move too late. King f6, king takes on a4, king takes on g6, king b4, h5, a4, h6, and so on. Rules to be observed. Prepare for the king's journey before the sacrifice or exchange, which is to divert the enemy king, is made. Make use of the zugzwang weapon whenever possible. Let the traveling companion advance. The impediments to the journey, enemy pawns on the wing to which the king is to travel, must be enticed forward. All this before the move which is to divert the enemy king out of action is made. Moving further, Nimzowitsch discusses the following heading: when a passed pawn should advance. A. On their own account. B. To win ground for their king who is following them, stopping the holes. C. To offer themselves as a sacrifice to divert the enemy. On the measure of the distance between the enemy king and the sacrifice which is to be offered him as bait. Nimzowitsch writes, it is an old story that the less experienced amateur, as a rule, lets their passed pawns advance at the very moment least suitable for them. With two united passed pawns, we saw them in a previous illustration, to allow an iron blockade to be set up. It may therefore be of practical use to note the cases in which an advance is indicated. We have to ask ourselves, when is a passed pawn ready to march? We shall differentiate three cases. A. When the advance brings the passed pawn nearer to their goal, which will only be when there is a weak blockade, or when the advanced passed pawn gains in value, in that they will then help to protect important points. Nimzowitsch here refers the reader to see his game versus Gottschall, which is game number 13 of the illustrative games section and was covered in part 13 of this video series. Nimzowitsch specifically points towards move 27, d6 of that game, which helped to protect the point e7 with a threat knight or a rook e7. Moving further, Nimzowitsch continues, on the other hand, it is wrong to push forward a pawn if they can be hopelessly blockaded and in their new position will only be protecting unimportant points. It is easy to bring a passed pawn into the board. It is a much more difficult thing to provide for their future. B. When the advancing passed pawn leaves the ground clear for a following piece, and in particular give their own king the chance of advancing against a new enemy pawn. Consider the position on board. The game proceeds f5, king f7, king e5, king e7, f6 check, king f7, king f5, and king f8. The f pawn has no future to look forward to. King g6 and wins the black h pawn. Here the advance was made simply and solely to drive away the black king, so that their own king might get near the black h pawn. When the advance takes place with the intention of sacrificing the pawn, so that the enemy king may be decisively drawn off from the field of battle, as shown in the previous illustration of the remote passed pawn. Another example would be the following. Consider the position on board. Here white's h pawn is to be offered as a sacrifice, is to die for king and country. It only remains to decide how and especially where. Since the effect of the sacrifice as diversion varies directly as the distance between the bit to be sacrificed and the enemy king, it would not be advantageous to let the h pawn advance, for this distance would become smaller. The right course is rather to play the king at once over to the other wing. Thus, king f4, king h4, king e5, king h3, king d6, and so on. Wholly barred, on the other hand, would be h4. Not content with sacrificing the pawn, they actually serve the pawn up on a platter, which I should call exaggerated politeness. After h4, there would follow king g6, king f4, king h5, king e5, king takes on h4, king d5, king g5, king c4, king f5, king b5, king e6, king takes on a5, king d7, king b6, threatening king b7, king c8, king a7, and king c7, shutting in the white king and drawing. After king f4, king h4, king e5, and king h3, His Black Majesty may console himself with the fact that his walk from h5 to h3 has given him an appetite. So the h pawn becomes a pleasant meal after the fatigues of the tour. But this is all the consolation he will get. The student must take this to heart, that though the sacrifice to divert the enemy king is willingly made, it must occur under circumstances which will cause the maximum loss of time to the enemy. It is not always so easy to recognize the motives of a pawn's advance. Consider the position on board. Play proceeds c5, king c7, king d5, king d7, c6 check, king c7, king c5, king c8 reserve blockade, king d6, king d8, c7 check, king c7, and king c6. The pawn advance seems to be quite unmotivated. Neither cases A, B, or C explained previously seem to apply here. But there follows a5, for black is now drawn into a zugzwang. They must send forward their pawn, and with this the curtain rises on an exciting drama. The black pawn goes a double stage. The pawn storms ahead, full of energy and youthful arrogance. But we choose rather the quiet a3 as an answer, in order to prove to our youthful opponent that repose is a very valuable trait. After a4 and king d6, the game is decided. Suppose that our young friend, the black a-pawn, recalled and soundly scolded for their impetuosity. Now goes the modest stage a6. We then demonstrate to the luckless youth that energy is also a trump card, and we play a4. After a5 and king d6, black is lost. The idea was the following: the stalemating of the black king forces an advance of his a-pawn, and then white's a-pawn will time their advance to meet them, so that after the a-pawns have run their course, white has the move. The latter then plays king d6 or king b6 and wins. This advance of the white c-pawn may therefore be classified under point A previously discussed. The pawn has advanced on their own account, for the affair of the tempi between the a-pawn makes of them a winning pawn, who otherwise, remembering the backward position of the white king, could only have been considered as a drawing pawn. Alright, we conclude this part of Aron Nimzowitsch, my system here, and we shall continue onwards from the next one. Shout out to Lady Tyra for gifting 5 subs to viewers on my Twitch stream last week. Fellow streamer Skwerly aka Derek with a gifted sub. An anonymous user with a gifted sub. Blabs99 with a sub. Mantrala with a sub. Mantrala is from India and a good chess player. He has a fun chess stream of his own and is a really nice guy who likes to help young players with chess. I will post a link to his stream in the video description. Do check him out. Fellow streamer Distant187 aka Seth and RockyMtnChess for continuing their subs. Mantrala the top chairer with 500 bits. RockyMtnChess at second with 100 bits. Fellow streamer and YouTuber Chess Poems at third with 69 bits last week. Thank you for the support everyone, much appreciated. Alright, till next time, take care and stay safe.